I've always believed that preparation was the one thing standing between me and chaos. My name is Mark Holloway. I'm 48 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I've been what you'd call an RV prepper. Not a doomsday prophet, not a bunker fanatic, but someone who saw the fragile glass wall that life is built on and decided to fortify it with my own 2 hands. My RV was supposed to be my fortress, my safety net, my answer to everything I couldn't control. Stocked with water, freeze-dried meals, solar panels, fuel reserves, medical kits, and redundancies stacked on redundancies, I used to drive down the highways of America with the quiet confidence that no storm, no collapse, no sudden disaster could ever catch me off guard. But preparation is a lie you tell yourself until the wilderness decides otherwise. I had pulled into a dispersed camping area just outside the Nevada desert, far from the crowded parks and electric hookups, a place where the horizon cut sharp against the sky and the silence pressed harder than the heat. Preppers like me pride ourselves on distance from noise, from dependency, from the systems that can crumble overnight. But that distance becomes a double-edged knife when things turn wrong. The first night, the desert spoke in whispers I couldn't place, a low hum against the metal skin of the RV, like static moving across aluminum. I told myself it was the wind shifting across the sand, a trick of temperature against steel. But when I stepped out, barefoot on gravel that radiated the day's heat, there was no wind, no motion at all, only the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I went back inside, checked my systems out of habit, solar batteries at 90%, water tanks full, generators primed, firearms oiled, radios tested. I told myself I was fine. That's what preppers do. We recite our checklists like prayers, but the silence didn't leave. It followed me into the bed, into the corners of the night. By the second evening, I was sweating in the cool air. It wasn't the heat. It was the unease, the way each system in my fortress suddenly seemed fragile when I looked at it too long. The food storage I had spent years building, what if it spoiled? The generator I swore by, what if it failed when I needed it most? I could hear my own doubts in the desert's hush. It was like the land itself was testing the limits of my conviction. That night I dreamed of alarms, not from my devices, but from inside my own chest. I woke to the sound of something tapping against the RV wall. Not sharp like a knock, softer, rhythmic. I froze, hand pressed against the pistol I kept under my mattress. 3 taps, silence, then 3 more. I forced myself up, scanned the perimeter with my flashlight. Nothing but rocks and scrub brush, no prints in the dirt, no tracks, just the endless night pressing in like a weight. That's when the truth cut through me. I wasn't afraid of what was out there. I was afraid of what I'd find if something was. On the 3rd day, the radio failed. Not the handheld, my entire base system. Static only, even on the emergency bands. I tore through wires, checked fuses, swapped batteries. Everything worked. Nothing worked. I couldn't call out, couldn't hear in. I told myself maybe the desert was blocking the signal, maybe the atmosphere had shifted, but the truth I wouldn't say out loud was simpler. I wasn't connected anymore. That was when I noticed the smell. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't rot. It was something stranger, like metal left in the rain too long, or a well that hadn't been drawn in decades. It came in waves, drifting through the cabin vents even though every seal was locked tight. I tore open the storage compartments, checked the tanks, the batteries, the gray water system. Nothing. No leaks, no spills. The smell would come, linger until it made me gag, then vanish as if it had never been. I started rationing my own trust the way I rationed water. If I couldn't trust the land, and I couldn't trust the silence, and I couldn't trust my own fortress, then what was left? By the 4th night, I began to hear breathing. Not outside, inside the RV. I'd kill the fans, kill the generator, sit in absolute stillness, and it would come from the far end of the cabin. Not loud, not fast, but steady. Too steady. Inhale. Exhale. I ripped apart my bunk, checked for leaks in the air ducts, convinced myself I was only hearing the sound of my own lungs echoing. But it didn't sync with me. My chest rose one way, the sound rose another. Every prepper has a nightmare buried under their confidence. For me, it wasn't running out of food or fuel. It wasn't hostile strangers or sudden collapse. My nightmare was simpler, realizing that no matter how much I prepared, no matter how well I armored myself against chance, there were forces I couldn't calculate, forces I couldn't stockpile against. The desert had found me, and it was stripping me piece by piece. The morning of the 5th day, I made coffee with shaking hands, the taste sour on my tongue. My reflection in the tinted window looked like someone I didn't recognize. Eyes sunk, jaw clenched. A man already halfway lost. I told myself I'd leave, pack it up, head east, drive until the silence broke. But when I turned the ignition, the engine coughed and died. Again and again. Everything worked. Fuel tanks full, battery strong, starter engaged, but the engine refused to catch. That's when the panic began. And once panic sets in, even the most seasoned prepper learns the truth. Preparedness doesn't save you from the weight of being human. I sat behind the wheel long after the ignition had given up its final cough, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The dashboard lights mocked me with their calm glow, systems operational, fuel lines primed, nothing out of place. Yet the engine refused to respond, like the desert itself had reached inside the machinery and squeezed shut its throat. I wanted to believe it was mechanical, that I could fix it the way I'd fixed 100 breakdowns before. But as the silence thickened around me, I knew it wasn't the kind of failure wrenches and grease could solve. The desert outside was flat and endless, but I felt it pressing in like walls. When you live your life preparing for every possibility, you learn to trust routine. Run diagnostics, check for leaks, troubleshoot the systems until they hum again. But nothing hummed. Nothing even faltered. It was as if the RV had simply chosen not to carry me any further. By noon, the sun turned the metal shell into an oven. I cracked the door for air, and the smell returned. Thicker now, wet iron and stagnant water. It wrapped around me as I stepped out, searing light stabbing my eyes. I scanned the barren landscape. No rivers, no ponds, nothing alive enough to rot. Yet the scent was undeniable, as though some underground reservoir was exhaling its breath into mine. I circled the RV, looking for damage. Tire pressure, perfect. Tanks, untouched. Exterior panels, solid. I crouched near the rear wheel and froze. The sand was damp. Not spilled water, not oil, not anything I could name. Just damp, as if the desert had sweated through the earth in a single patch beneath my home on wheels. I pressed my fingers into it. Cold, colder than stone had any right to be under that merciless sun. I wiped my hand on my jeans, but the chill clung to my skin. That night I stayed awake, flashlight in hand, pistol on the counter. I had told myself I was guarding against intruders, but the truth was uglier. I was trying to prove to myself that the sounds and smells weren't coming from me. The desert is a mirror. It reflects whatever you bring to it, magnifies it until you can't ignore it. For some people, that reflection is peace. For me, it was a war with shadows. The breathing came back just past midnight, louder this time, more insistent. It rose from the floor, from the vents, from places no breath should be. I held my own air in my chest, testing. The sound continued, calm and steady, mocking my shallow gasps. My flashlight beam cut across the cabin, and for a split second I swore I saw the mattress dip, as if someone had pressed a hand into it and let go. I didn't sleep. By the 6th day, paranoia was carving me hollow. I rationed my food even though I had enough to last months. I sipped water as though every swallow might be my last. I kept calculating distances in my head. 40 miles to the nearest highway, 60 to the nearest town, 25 if I cut cross-country toward the mountains. I could hike it, I told myself. I could abandon the fortress I had built and trust my legs. But I didn't. Something in me knew that stepping into the desert alone would be worse. Late in the afternoon, I climbed onto the RV roof to check the panels. The sky stretched cloudless, so blue it hurt, but when I crouched to inspect the array, I saw it again. The dampness. A streak across the white roof, beating like condensation. I touched it. Same chill. Same smell. Like water pulled from a place where no light had ever reached. I climbed down fast, nearly slipped on the ladder. My boots hit the sand, and I realized the silence was gone. There was sound now, low, steady, vibrating. Not the hum of machinery, not the rush of wind. It was beneath me, like the earth itself was growling through the soles of my shoes. I backed into the RV, slammed the door, and locked it, though I knew a lock wouldn't matter. My fortress no longer felt like protection. It felt like a coffin. That night, the tapping returned, louder. Not 3 taps this time, but 6, then 8. Then a pause before a slow scrape ran along the side panel from front to back. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound cut through. The breathing joined it. Heavy now, almost animal. I thought of every weapon I had, knives, rifles, the handgun, and realized they were meaningless if I couldn't see what I was fighting. I shouted then. Not words, just sound. A raw, human roar to drown out the whispering. But when the echo died, the desert answered. It knocked back. Panic stripped away reason. I slammed open compartments, tossing gear, shoving ammo into bags, stuffing food into a pack as though I could outrun the thing pressing at my walls. I told myself I'd leave, hike out, find a ranger station or a road or anything that resembled the world I used to know. But the moment I stepped toward the door, the engine alarm blared. The one alarm I had never heard before. The dash lights flickered. Glowing symbols I didn't recognize, codes that weren't in any manual. And then it all shut off. Black. Silent. In that darkness, I heard my name. Not loud, not shouted, but spoken the way you speak into someone's ear when you're close enough to touch. Mark. The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, the beam slicing upward in a trembling arc. There was nothing there, nothing I could see. But the air carried the weight of presence, thick and undeniable. My instincts told me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Every muscle locked, every breath caught. I could hear my own pulse hammering against my skull, but beneath it the breathing still went on, steady, patient, unhurried. That was when I understood. This wasn't about my supplies, my systems, my fortress. It wasn't about preparation or survival. It was about breaking me. The desert hadn't come for my food or fuel. It had come for my faith. And little by little, it was winning. I don't remember making the decision to run. I just remember the weight of the flashlight in my hand, the slam of the RV door against the side panel, and the sudden slap of night air on my face. I bolted into the desert with my pack half-zipped, boots pounding the sand, the stars burning like cold fire overhead. The silence that had haunted me was gone now, replaced by a chorus of sound I couldn't name. The breathing followed, the knocking followed. My name followed, whispered low, then louder, then echoing across the flat expanse as though the desert itself had taken my voice and twisted it. I ran until my legs shook, until my throat tore with dry air, until I dropped to my knees and nearly vomited from the taste of iron that coated my mouth. When I dared to look back, the RV was still there. Not smaller with distance, not shrinking into the horizon the way it should have. It was right where I had left it, only now it looked closer, as though I hadn't moved at all. The panic set in hard, raw, the kind of panic that makes even a prepper forget his checklists. I staggered to my feet, forced myself to try again, this time charting a straight line with the North Star, refusing to look back. Each step carved fire through my calves. Each inhale was a knife. But when I turned, the RV still loomed, impossibly still, impossibly near, like a shadow that refused to fall behind. I dropped the pack. I didn't care about the food, the ammo, the water. None of it mattered if the land itself wouldn't let me leave. I screamed at the night, a guttural roar, the kind of sound you make when you're no longer sure if you're alive or already halfway dead. My own echo came back warped, bent, like someone else was screaming with me in a throat not quite human. That broke me. I stumbled back to the RV, hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the ladder. The door was still unlocked. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped inside, stronger than before, flooding every breath, drowning me in the metallic reek of drowned wells and rusted iron. I gagged, pressed a rag over my nose, but the stench coated the fabric, seeped into my teeth. The breathing was inside, louder now, so close it might as well have been inside my own chest. The lights flickered once, twice, then stayed dark. The only glow came from the weak spill of stars through the tinted glass. Mark. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a word that filled the cabin, vibrating the walls, rattling the loose forks in the drawers. My name, spoken not like a greeting but like a verdict. I pressed my back to the door, pistol raised, trying to find something, anything to aim at. But there was no body, no face, only the sense of presence that had teeth without a mouth, fingers without a hand. Mark! I fired. The shot shattered the silence, deafened my ears, left ringing in the dark. The recoil stung my wrist. The smell of powder cut through the metallic stench for an instant. But when the smoke cleared, nothing had changed. The sound went on. The breathing never faltered. The bullet had gone into the wall. My fortress was bleeding drywall and insulation. That was when the walls began to bulge. Not much at first, just a shiver across the aluminum skin like pressure from outside. But then the panels pushed inward, slow, deliberate, as if the desert itself was pressing its fingers against the shell of my sanctuary. I stumbled forward, dropped the pistol, scrambled to the dash. I twisted the ignition again and again, my screams choking in my throat as the engine refused, the dashboard flashing dead. The radio crackled. For days it had been silent, nothing but static, but now a voice broke through. Not clear, distorted, like someone speaking underwater. You left it, unfinished. The static swallowed the rest. You knew. We wait. I slammed my fist against the console until my knuckles split. The blood felt hot, real, grounding, but it didn't change the fact that the voice was real, too. I thought of every lesson I had ever learned in years of prepping. Trust your gear, trust your systems, trust yourself. But I couldn't. My gear had failed. My systems had betrayed me. And myself, I was breaking apart in pieces I couldn't gather. I stumbled into the back, slammed open compartments, digging for anything I hadn't thought to use. Flares, lanterns, knives. My hands shook too hard to hold them steady. The air grew thick, wet, cloying, the breathing louder now than the blood in my ears. That was when I saw it. In the reflection of the small bathroom mirror, half cracked from years of travel, something stood behind me. Not clear, not defined. Just a shape darker than the dark. Shoulders too broad, head tilted too low, as if studying me with eyes I couldn't see. The reflection shuddered, like the glass itself was water, and then the figure leaned forward. Closer, closer, until it was almost touching me. I spun, knife raised, but there was nothing in the cabin. Only the mirror cracked wider now, a jagged line splitting my reflection in two. One half of me pale and broken, the other half smiling. I threw the knife. The mirror shattered, glass raining across the floor. The smile vanished, but the sound didn't. The RV rocked then, not from wind, not from earthquake, from something pushing, heaving against its weight. The tires lifted an inch, slammed back down. Plates fell from the cupboards, clattering into shards across the floor. The walls groaned like bones under strain. I dropped to my knees and begged, not for safety, not even for survival. I begged to understand. Because preppers, more than anyone, need answers. Without answers, there is no preparation. Without preparation, there is no control. But the desert gave me none. Only the breathing. Only the knock that came again, slow and steady, shaking the steel beneath my palms. I stayed on the floor until dawn, knees bruised, throat raw, eyes burning from exhaustion. The desert outside remained unchanged, silent, endless, indifferent. But inside, I knew something had shifted. My fortress was no longer mine. My systems were no longer mine. And maybe, just maybe, my name was no longer mine either. By the time the sun rose again, my body felt like a husk that someone else had left behind. I sat slumped against the galley counter, pistol on the floor, hands raw and trembling. The desert outside glowed with that merciless, pale light, the kind that makes shadows vanish and leaves no room for mercy. I should have moved then, should have packed what I could and walked until my legs gave out. But the thought of opening that door felt like surrender. Whatever was outside or inside had been waiting for me to do just that. I forced myself up, muscles stiff, mouth coated in the taste of metal and dust. The system still showed blank. No power, no comms, no engine. My RV had become a sealed box of silence and breath. The only sound left was me, pacing the narrow aisle, whispering my own name as if to remind myself that it still belonged to me. Mark Holloway, 48 years old, prepper, survivor. But the desert answered back. Every time I said it, I swore I heard an echo. Not the echo of my own voice bouncing off aluminum walls. Softer, delayed, as if someone else was learning the shape of my name, rolling it across their unseen tongue. By mid-afternoon, the heat became unbearable. I cracked a window, praying for air, and what slid in wasn't air at all. It was the smell, stronger than ever, so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat, like water left in a grave. My gag reflex took me to my knees. I dry heaved until my ribs ached, until black spots swam at the edges of my vision. When I lifted my head, I noticed something impossible. The damp patch of sand outside the window was bigger. It stretched wider now, encircling the tires like a stain spreading outward, and as I stared, I thought I saw it ripple. Not like wind on water, more like breath, an inhale, an exhale, right beneath the surface of the earth. I staggered back, slammed the window shut, pressed my forehead to the cool metal. My mind spun through every rational explanation. Groundwater rising, condensation, a busted tank I had missed. But deep down I knew. The desert wasn't dry at all. It was alive, and it had chosen me. That night, I made the mistake of lighting a flare. I had convinced myself it would help, maybe scare off whatever prowled outside, maybe draw attention from a distant hiker or ranger. I stood in the doorway with that searing red stick spitting light into the blackness, the smell of sulfur thick in my nostrils. For a moment I felt power again, control. I raised the flare high, its glow staining then crimson. Then I saw them. Footprints. Not human, not animal. Just impressions in the sand, circling the RV, pressed deep as though made by something heavy that had been pacing the entire time I'd been inside. And as I stared, I realized they weren't depressions at all. They were rising, little mounds where the sand pushed up from beneath, forming the shape of steps as something invisible moved closer. The flare hissed in my grip. My hand shook. The prints circled once, twice, then stopped, right at the threshold. And that's when the voice came again. Not from outside, from the ground itself. Unfinished. The sand shivered. My legs buckled. I dropped the flare. The red light rolled across the floor, casting long, jagged shadows up the walls. The RV shuddered once, hard, and I knew in my gut that it wasn't just sitting on the desert anymore, it was being held. I killed the flare with my boot, plunging myself back into the dark, better blind than to see what came next. Hours blurred. I don't know if I slept or if I drifted into some half-conscious state where dreams and waking shared the same air. But I remember this, the sound of water dripping. Drip, drip, drip. At first I thought it came from the sink, then from the ceiling, then from everywhere at once. I sat up, heart racing, and realized the floor was wet. My bare feet splashed into it, a thin sheet of icy liquid coating the vinyl. I tasted bile in my throat, bent down, scooped a handful to my lips, because when you're trapped long enough, even fear bends into thirst. It wasn't water. It was thick, metallic, like drinking a coin left in blood. I spit it out, gagging, wiping my mouth against my sleeve until my gums burned. The liquid kept rising, spreading across the floor, soaking into my mattress, seeping into the walls. I scrambled onto the counter, bare feet slipping, clutching the cabinets like a child avoiding a tide. The desert was filling me in. The breathing grew louder, synced with the rhythm of the rising liquid. Inhale. The water swelled an inch higher. Exhale. It retreated a fraction, only to surge again stronger. A tide that answered to lungs I couldn't see. I screamed until my throat tore raw, until my voice was nothing but rasping air. I screamed for anyone, for anything, for some reason why my fortress had become a tomb. But the desert doesn't explain itself. It only listens, and it only takes. By dawn, the floor was dry again. Bone dry, no trace of water, no trace of anything but my own footprints smeared in panic across the vinyl. My mouth still tasted of rust, my tongue swollen with thirst. But the RV was silent again. That silence was worse than the noise. I knew then that I couldn't outweight it. I couldn't outstock it, outsmart it, outprepare it. My nightmare wasn't that I had failed to pack enough. My nightmare was that none of it mattered. So I made my choice. I grabbed the last flare, the last of my water, my sidearm, and a small canvas tarp. I shoved open the door before I could talk myself out of it. The desert heat slammed me in the face, the sun already climbing like a predator over the horizon. I marched toward the mountains, straight into the glare, not looking back this time. My legs carried me further than I expected. The sand baked through my soles, sweat stung my eyes, and every step felt like it might be the last. But for the first time in days, the RV was behind me. I could feel distance, real distance. And then the smell, that same metallic rot seeping up from the ground. I stopped, looked down. The sand beneath my boots was damp, and when I lifted my foot, the print filled instantly, like something beneath had been with that gap to open. A hand, pale, wet, reaching up through the earth, fingers stretching to grab the heel I had just lifted. I stumbled back, fell hard, scrambled until my knees bled. The sand smoothed over as if nothing had broken it. The desert was whole again, but I had seen it, and I knew then I wasn't walking out of this. I lay in the sand for a long time, staring at the empty patch where the hand had been. The desert looked flat and harmless again, as though it hadn't just tried to claim me. The sun hung cruel and steady above me, and I realized that every second I stayed there meant I was being baked alive. I forced myself up, knees trembling, vision blurred, and I staggered forward again. Every step, I expected to feel fingers hook around my ankle. Every time the wind shifted, I expected to hear my name carried on it. And every shadow in the corners of my vision, my God, I thought they would solidify into someone or something, standing just out of reach. Hours passed. My canteen emptied. My throat cracked. I walked until my shadow stretched long across the sand, and still the mountains didn't look any closer. The horizon mocked me, stretching further away with every step, as though the land itself bent to keep me inside it. By dusk, I could go no further. I dropped to my knees, chest heaving, sweat soaking my shirt. The desert was quiet again. Too quiet, like it had drawn back just enough to let me feel hope before crushing me again. I pulled out the flare, my last bright weapon, and gripped it like a prayer. That's when I heard it, a sound like rushing water. At first, I thought it was mirage, the heat baking hallucinations into my brain. But no, beneath the desert's skin, beneath the crust of sand, I could hear it. A river running right under my knees. And then the ground pulsed. Not once, not randomly, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I scrambled back, heels kicking up dust. The sand rose and fell in a slow inhale, exhale, as though something beneath the desert crust was sleeping. Or maybe not sleeping, maybe waiting. I snapped the flare to life, red light hissing and roaring in the deepening dark. I held it above me, a feeble torch, but it painted the land around me in blood. The heartbeat quickened. The sand rippled outward in a circle, widening until I was standing on an island of trembling earth. And then the voice came again. Not whisper, not echo. A bellow rising through my bones, shaking every cell inside me. Mark. I fell to my knees. The flare slipped, seared my palm, but I didn't feel the burn. My ears were full of that single word, stretched and bent, as though it had been spoken not by one mouth, but by 1,000 all at once. The sand split open. I screamed. The flare sputtered, casting frantic light over a pit yawning at my feet. Darkness inside it, too deep for the glow to reach. But from within came the stench, the metallic, drowning rot so strong it made my eyes water. And from the pit, something began to rise. Not solid, not flesh, a shape made of shadow and vapor, with edges that shifted as if they couldn't decide what form to take. But I saw impressions, shoulders too broad, arms too long, a head that turned unnaturally slow toward me. The flare hissed and cracked, throwing sparks across its body, but the sparks passed through as if it weren't there at all. Yet I could feel it. Its weight pressed on me, crushed me into the sand. My lungs refused to expand. My heartbeat raced out of rhythm. My body wanted to collapse, to surrender, to be swallowed. And then, clearer than ever, the voice spoke again. Unfinished. My mind raced, spinning through memories I didn't know I still had. The unfinished preps, the water tank I never patched, the radio I hadn't fully rewired, the promise I'd made to my father that I'd carry on his prepping, never leave anything undone. And suddenly I knew it wasn't about food or fuel. It wasn't about supplies. It was about me. I was unfinished. The flare was almost dead, spitting embers onto my burned hand. With a scream, I hurled it into the pit. For a split second, the red light revealed what lay below. Not water, not stone. Faces. Hundreds. Thousands. Pale, half-formed faces pressed together like bodies drowned in mud. Eyes wide, mouths moving with no sound, their features melted into one another, indistinguishable, like clay pulled too thin. And all of them stared up at me. The flare hissed out. Darkness swallowed everything. I ran. I don't know how, don't know where, only that my legs carried me blindly into the night, sand cutting my skin, lungs tearing for air. Behind me, the ground closed with a roar, the desert sealing itself again. But the stench lingered, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my soul. At some point, I fell, and when I opened my eyes, I was back at the RV. I don't remember walking there, don't remember turning. But there it was, hulking in the starlight, windows dark, door ajar as though it had been waiting for me. I stumbled inside, too broken to resist. The air was thick, wet, heavy. The breathing was everywhere now, inside every wall, every vent. I collapsed onto the mattress and lay there, chest heaving, staring into the black. And then, for the first time, the voice said more than my name. You knew we'd come. You built for us. You prepared for us, but you never finished. And now. The sentence hung unfinished itself, like the desert wanted me to supply the ending. I closed my eyes. I wanted it to be over, but sleep didn't come. Only the sound of breathing, only the cold dampness spreading beneath me, soaking through the mattress, rising around my body, and the certainty, deep in my bones, that when it finally pulled me under, I would not be alone. I would join the faces. The night stretched on without time. I don't know if I was awake or if I had slipped into something deeper, something that wasn't sleep, but wasn't life either. My body was soaked, though no water remained when I pressed my hand to the mattress. My breath rose and fell in rhythm with the breathing around me until I could no longer tell which was mine and which was theirs. I thought about the years I had spent preparing, the countless nights I'd inventoried supplies, checked locks, studied maps, fortified this RV until it was more fortress than home. Every ounce of effort was poured into control. That was the root of it, control against chaos, to be ready when others weren't, to be the last man standing. But here, in the middle of the Nevada desert, all of that had been stripped away. My systems had failed. My preparations had meant nothing. And the one thing I thought I owned beyond all else, my name, was no longer mine to speak. The voice came again, softer this time, almost tender. Mark. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. My body was too broken for panic. Instead, I whispered back, I know. The silence that followed was heavier than the voice itself. It pressed against my skull, filled my lungs, held me in its grip. For a moment, I thought that was it, that I would sink into the same pit I had seen, join those faces, become another unfinished thing lost in the dark. But then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was despair. Or maybe it was the last spark of human will refusing to be swallowed. Whatever it was, I found myself laughing. It wasn't the laugh of a man who found comfort. It was jagged, bitter, scraped, raw. You want unfinished? That's what I am. That's what we all are. You'll never be done with us. The RV shook once, hard enough to rattle the dishes still clinging to their hooks. The breathing stuttered, as though caught off guard. For the first time since it began, the rhythm broke. I pushed myself to my feet. My legs barely held, but I stood anyway, swaying in the dark like a scarecrow against the wind. You can take my fortress, you can take my body, but you'll never finish me. Not here, not in this desert, not in this life. The words weren't brave, they weren't even strong. They were the only thing I had left, the refusal to be erased quietly. The silence stretched. Then slowly, the presence drew back. The air grew lighter, thinner, easier to breathe. The smell thinned until it was only memory on my tongue, and the walls, for the first time in days, stood still. When dawn came, the RV was empty. The system still dead, the radio still blank, the engine still silent, but the breathing was gone. I stepped outside into the rising sun. The desert stretched endless and barren, but the damp patch was gone. The sand lay dry, smooth, ordinary. I searched for prints, for ripples, for proof of the nights I had endured. There was none. Only me. I don't know how I made it out. I don't remember walking. I don't remember finding the road. All I know is that eventually I woke to the sound of tires on asphalt and a stranger's voice asking if I was alive. Weeks later, when I was back among people, back in a world where engines roared and radios hummed, I tried to explain. No one believed me. They chalked it up to heat stroke, isolation, hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know this. Preparation is a shield, but it is not salvation. You can stock every shelf, lock every door, draw every map, and still the world will find a way to show you that you are unfinished. The true nightmare isn't being unprepared. It's realizing that there are things you can never prepare for. Even now, years later, I still wake in the night and hold my breath listening. Sometimes the silence is clean. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes just at the edge of hearing, I catch it again. The inhale, the exhale. And once, when the wind rattled the walls just right, I heard my name. And I knew the desert wasn't finished with me. I've driven Route 101 more times than I can count, but it wasn't until last autumn that the road through the redwood forest showed me its true face. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Oregon, and I've always been drawn to the coastlines and highways that carve their way between the ocean and the towering trees. That trip was supposed to be a chance to clear my head, to shake off a year of stress and loss. I loaded up my RV, parked my worries in the rear view, and headed south into California, toward the fog-wrapped giants of the redwoods. But I had no idea that night would burn itself into my memory, turning what should have been peace into something I've been running from ever since. The first day on the road felt like a release. I followed the Pacific down through Oregon, stopping at pull-offs where waves battered the rocks in a spray that looked silver in the slanting light. By the time I crossed into Northern California, I felt lighter than I had in months. The redwoods rose up around me like cathedrals, their trunks thick enough to swallow silence. I had a small campsite marked out near Crescent City, nothing fancy, just a dirt pad and a picnic table beside a shallow stream. When I pulled the RV into place, I left the door open and let the smell of damp bark and moss drift in. It smelled like earth after rain, like something steady enough to hold me for a while. That first night should have been restful. I grilled some food, sat with a lantern as the darkness folded itself over the forest, and listened to the waters trickle. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees weren't still. They creaked, like bones adjusting, but I told myself that was just the cooling air, the natural settling of something ancient. When I finally climbed into bed, I lay awake longer than I expected, listening. The sound that kept returning wasn't the stream or the trees, it was the faint, uneven rhythm of footsteps outside. I told myself it had to be an animal. Maybe a raccoon, maybe even a deer passing close by, but it didn't sound like hooves. It was slow, dragging, almost deliberate. I peered through the blinds and saw nothing but the faint silver glow of moonlight breaking through the branches. The forest seemed empty, still. I forced myself back down, but sleep was thin and restless, and by morning I felt like I hadn't truly closed my eyes. The next evening, I decided I wouldn't sit idle in camp. I'd drive further south, maybe find a trailhead or a turnout where I could walk a bit before night set in. Around dusk, the fog thickened along Route 101, wrapping the road in a low, shifting haze that headlights couldn't cut clean through. The world shrank to a tunnel ahead of me, the trees looming like walls. It was there, just past a sharp curve, that I first saw him. A figure stood on the shoulder of the highway, his arm outstretched with a thumb pointing upward. A hitchhiker. He wore a dark jacket torn at the shoulder and jeans that looked soaked around the cuffs. His face was partly shadowed by the hood, but I saw enough. A young man, maybe mid-20s, pale as if he'd been walking through fog his entire life. His eyes caught the light for an instant, and they looked hollow, reflective like glass. I should have kept driving. Every instinct in me whispered that stopping was wrong. But I thought about all the times people had helped me when I broke down or when I needed a ride years back. I told myself he was just another traveler. The RV slowed before I even made the decision, and soon he was climbing in, mumbling a thanks so quiet I barely caught it. "My name's Marcus," I said, trying to break the silence. "Where you headed?" He didn't answer at first. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his hands resting in his lap like he wasn't sure what to do with them. The smell that came off him was sharp, metallic, like wet rust. Finally, he said, "South." Just that. Nothing more. His voice sounded strained, as if he hadn't spoken in days. The miles ticked by under the wheels, but every second stretched. The fog pressed against the glass, and the trees leaned so close it felt like they wanted to swallow the road. My passenger never shifted, never looked at me. His head was turned toward the window, though I couldn't tell if he was watching the forest or only staring through it. After 10 miles or so, I asked if there was a place I should pull over for him. He finally turned his head, and his expression, it was empty, but heavy. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "I just need to get out." I pulled onto a wide gravel turnout. The RV shuddered to a stop, and before I could say anything else, he opened the door and stepped into the fog. He didn't thank me, didn't look back. He just walked into the white wall, swallowed in less than 3 steps. I waited, expecting to hear branches breaking or gravel crunching as he moved away. But there was nothing, no sound at all. Just silence, thicker than the fog itself. That silence followed me back to camp. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his pale reflection in the headlights. The way his body seemed almost weightless, like he was never fully inside the RV. I told myself it was just an odd encounter, nothing more. But deep down, I knew the forest had let something hitch a ride with me. The next night proved it. I woke up to knocking. At first, I thought it was a branch tapping the roof or maybe the wind rocking something loose. But the sound was too steady. 3 slow, heavy knocks against the RV door. I froze in my bed, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The knocking came again, louder this time. I crept toward the door, every part of me wanting to scream at myself to stop. I pressed my eye to the peephole and my stomach turned to ice. The hitchhiker was standing there, his hood was down now, and I saw his face clearly under the pale wash of moonlight. His skin was gray, lips cracked, eyes wide and vacant, reflecting nothing. He didn't move except for his hand, which lifted and pressed against the door with slow, deliberate force. The knock wasn't asking for entry, it was insisting. I staggered back, searching for anything, any weapon, though I knew a knife or bat wouldn't matter against something like him. My breath was loud, too loud, and then I realized something worse. The knocking wasn't just at the door anymore. It echoed from the side of the RV, from the roof, from the windows, as if a dozen hands were beating in rhythm, demanding I open up. And underneath it all, faint but clear, came a voice, his voice, whispering my name over and over. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that narrow space between the bed and the door, but the knocking seemed to stretch time until every second scraped across my nerves. My pulse beat so hard in my ears that it drowned out the softer sounds, the whispers that carried my name. The way he spoke it wasn't like a request. It wasn't even like he was calling to me. It was a claim, as though the syllables had already belonged to him, and he was reminding me of the fact. "Marcus," the voice hissed. "Marcus." I stumbled back toward the window above the sink, fumbling for the blinds, desperate to see if he was still there. I pulled them up an inch, just enough to peek, but the glass only reflected my pale, trembling face. Outside was nothing but fog. The knocking slowed, then stopped altogether. Silence pooled around the RV like heavy water. I stood in that silence until my legs ached, until I could finally force myself to move. I grabbed the flashlight, the heaviest one I had, and stood with it like a weapon. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I finally convinced myself he was gone, that maybe the whole thing was some kind of half-dream, spun out of the encounter on the road. But when I finally lay back down, I couldn't close my eyes without seeing his hand pressed flat against the door, his hollow gaze fixed on me. By the time morning came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The forest outside was drenched in dew, the stream running louder from the night's rain. Everything looked fresh and normal. Too normal. That's how you know something's wrong, when the world looks like it's trying too hard to convince you it's fine. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit, and I drove out of the sight. I didn't have a plan except to keep moving, south along 101, through the rolling waves of fog and the endless green spires of the redwoods. I thought maybe if I kept the miles under me, I could outrun whatever had followed me. But you can't outrun something that's already inside. That evening, I found another campground further down the road, closer to Trinidad. It was bigger, more populated. Other RVs scattered under the trees, a few tents, laughter from kids riding bikes along the gravel loops. I thought being around people would help. Safety in numbers. I told myself it was exactly what I needed. For a while, it seemed to work. I cooked some pasta on the stove, sat at the picnic table, and listened to the sounds of other campers nearby. The normalcy of it made me almost forget. Almost. Until the sun dipped behind the canopy and the shadows stretched long across the campsites. That's when I noticed him again. He was standing at the tree line, just beyond where the lantern light faded. His dark jacket, the torn shoulder, the soaked cuffs. I knew it instantly. He didn't move, didn't step closer. He just stood, his body blending with the shadows, his face hidden by the fog rolling in from the highway. I froze at the table, my fork halfway to my mouth. When I blinked, he was gone. Not walked away. Just gone, like the fog had swallowed him whole. The other campers didn't seem to notice. Kids still biked, parents still sat around fires. No one else reacted. I wanted to ask, to shout, did anyone see him? But the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to be the crazy guy in the campground. That night, I locked every window, every latch, pulled the blinds tight, and sat with the flashlight clutched in my hand until exhaustion finally dragged me down. It wasn't enough. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching under footsteps. Not one pair, many, slow, dragging, circling the RV. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped at the door, and then the knocking began again. 3 heavy thuds, exactly like before. This time, though, it wasn't just at the door. The roof above me groaned under weight, like someone was crawling across it, testing the seams. The walls vibrated with faint scratching, nails dragging down metal. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. And then came the whisper. Not one voice, but many. Layered, overlapping, weaving together until it was a hiss of sound filling the RV from every side. My name over and over, but stretched and twisted, like a recording slowed down until it warped. I don't remember making the decision to move. I just found myself at the driver's seat, turning the key with shaking hands, the engine roaring to life. The whispers swelled as if the voices were inside with me, screaming to drown it out. I slammed the RV into drive and tore out of the campground, gravel spraying behind me. The headlights cut through the fog, and the forest whipped past in a blur. My chest heaved with every breath, and I didn't stop until I was back on the highway, the other campsites far behind. But even then, I could feel it, the sense of weight inside the RV, as though I wasn't alone. I pulled over at a rest stop near Oric, shaking so badly I could barely turn the engine off. The parking lot was empty except for one trucker's rig idling at the far end. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I saw the handprint. On the inside of the windshield, pressed in pale gray condensation, was the outline of a hand. Thin fingers splayed wide right in front of the passenger seat. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared at it until my vision blurred with tears. Slowly, the print began to fade, as though the glass itself was swallowing it, leaving nothing behind but my reflection. I knew then this wasn't about picking up a stranger. It wasn't about a simple hitchhiker. The forest had given me something that wasn't meant to be carried away, and now it was riding with me, no matter where I went. I stayed in that rest stop until dawn, refusing to close my eyes, my body shivering with adrenaline and exhaustion. The trucker left around 4, and then I was alone again. By sunrise, I forced myself back onto the road, though every mile felt heavier than the last. Somewhere south of Arcata, the fog thinned and the ocean came back into view, a stretch of gray waves breaking under the pale sky. For a moment, I thought I could leave it behind, that daylight could burn away whatever clung to me. But then I caught movement in the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was no longer empty. He was sitting there as solid as you or me. His hood was up again, but his face turned slowly toward me, eyes hollow, lips pulling into the faintest shadow of a smile. I nearly veered off the road. When I looked again, the seat was empty. Just fabric, worn and stained from years of travel. But the smell lingered, that metallic tang of wet rust filling my lungs. That was the moment I realized escape wasn't about miles. It wasn't about daylight or crowds or locks. The hitchhiker wasn't outside anymore. He was inside, and he wasn't leaving. I drove for hours after that, pushing the RV harder than I should have, knuckles white around the wheel. Every time I glanced at the passenger seat, I expected to see him again, staring at me with that hollow gaze. And though the seat stayed empty, I could feel it. His weight pressing into the air, the sense of someone leaning close, just outside the edge of sight. I tried to rationalize. Stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even fumes leaking into the cabin. I'd lost people before, my father a few years back, my sister when we were still young, and grief has a way of dressing itself up in hallucinations. I told myself this was my mind cracking under loneliness, under exhaustion. But when the wind shifted and I smelled that rusted metal scent again, sharp as blood, all the explanations fell apart. South of Eureka, I pulled into another rest stop, determined to prove to myself I wasn't unraveling. I needed to face it, whatever it was. The lot was empty, the trees closing around like a cage. I shut off the engine, and silence filled the RV. I sat there, listening, barely breathing. At first, nothing. Just the faint creak of cooling metal, the occasional rustle of wind outside. Then fingers, tapping on the back window, not loud, but insistent. A rhythm. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, I turned in my seat. The blinds were down, but the tapping continued, steady as a pulse. I grabbed the flashlight, forced myself to stand, and edged toward the back. Every step felt like I was wading through water. When I yanked the blinds up, the beam of my flashlight cut through the glass. Nothing, just the dense curtain of trees beyond. My hand shook as I reached out and pressed the light closer to the window. That's when I saw it, imprints in the condensation. Fingers dragging down from the top of the glass, long, thin, leaving streaks like scratches. And in the center, faint but clear, the outline of a face pressed against the pane. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My throat went dry. The glass was empty again, but I knew what I saw. The redwoods outside loomed darker, their trunks like endless shadows. The air felt heavy, pressing in, suffocating. That's when I heard the door handle. It rattled once, then again, harder, metal groaning as if someone outside was testing it. I lunged for the driver's seat, slamming the locks into place even though I knew they wouldn't matter. The handle rattled again, and then a voice whispered through the door. "Let me back in." It wasn't just one voice. It was layers, overlapping, male and female, old and young. A chorus of hunger, every word dragging across my skin like ice. I slammed the engine on and floored it, tires spitting gravel as I shot back onto the highway. My chest was a furnace, breath burning in short, panicked bursts. I didn't look at the mirrors. I didn't want to see what might be staring back. The miles blurred. The fog thickened again, weaving across the highway until I was driving through a tunnel of white. My headlights caught movement at the edge of the road, figures standing among the trees. Dozens of them. Shadows in jackets with pale, hollow faces. Hitchhikers, all with arms raised, thumbs pointing skyward. My grip tightened on the wheel. I refused to stop. I pressed harder, the RV rattling as it climbed past 60, 70. But no matter how far I went, the figures kept appearing, standing just inside the fog, each one staring, waiting. At last, I reached a turnout and swung the RV off the road. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't shift gears. The engine idled, the headlights casting beams into the mist. And there he was again. The first one, the one I'd picked up, standing directly in front of the RV, staring into the light. His hood was down now. His skin was cracked and gray, lips bloodless, eyes as empty as glass jars. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open, and pressed it against the hood. The metal groaned under the pressure. My chest tightened. He shouldn't have been solid, but I could feel the weight through the steering column, the shudder as though the RV was sinking under his touch. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hand hovered over the gear shift, but some part of me knew that running wouldn't change anything anymore. He wasn't outside. He never had been. He was inside, threaded through the silence, the fog, the air itself. And then, my name again. Marcus. But this time, the voice wasn't angry. It was almost pleading, thin and cracked, like someone drowning just beneath the surface of the water. For a moment, something shifted in me. I thought, what if he wasn't a monster? What if he was trapped? What if the forest held him, bound him, and all he wanted was release? I gripped the wheel, torn between terror and pity. My father's voice echoed in my memory. He used to say the worst thing about grief was that it made you see ghosts where there were none. Maybe I was just another fool talking to shadows. Or maybe the redwoods had always hidden something deeper, something ancient that wore the face of the lost. The figure pressed harder against the hood, the metal bending with a scream. My breath came ragged. I shouted into the fog, my voice shaking. What do you want from me? For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The fog thinned, the knocking, the whispers, the weight, all of it vanished. The road stretched ahead, empty, silent. And then, in the glass of the windshield, I saw it. Not the forest, not the road, but rows of faces pressed against the inside of the RV, staring out at me from every window. Pale, hollow-eyed, mouths whispering soundless words. My stomach turned to ice. The glass began to crack, thin lines spreading across the windshield, spiderwebbing under invisible pressure. The chorus of voices rose again, this time inside my head, not outside. My name over and over, until it wasn't a name anymore. It was a demand. I slammed the RV into gear and tore down the highway, windshield groaning under the strain, eyes burning from tears. I didn't care where I ended up, didn't care if the road dropped off into the ocean. I just needed to outrun it, even though I already knew the truth. The hitchhiker was no longer something I could leave behind. He had been waiting for someone like me, someone foolish enough to stop. And now, I was his ride. The highway wound like a dark ribbon through the redwoods, the fog swallowing each curve before I reached it. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. The windshield still held its cracks, faint but spreading like veins, as though the glass had been marked from the inside. I couldn't shake the image of those faces pressed against it, their mouths moving in unison, whispering my name until it no longer sounded like mine. I didn't know where I was driving. The GPS was useless, the signal cutting in and out under the heavy canopy. The world shrank to the twin beams of my headlights and the pounding rhythm of my heart. Every so often, I glanced at the passenger seat, empty, and yet the air sagged with the weight of another presence. That metallic tang clung to the back of my throat, sharper now, like blood left too long in the open. I told myself I just needed daylight. If I could make it through to morning, maybe it would weaken. Maybe the shadows would loosen their grip. But as the first hints of dawn bled into the fog, I realized the light only made the world stranger. The redwoods loomed taller, their trunks twisted, their bark etched with shapes that looked almost like faces. The fog glowed with a dull silver sheen, as if it was alive, pulsing in rhythm with the beat of my heart. I pulled off at a turnout, engine idling as I tried to steady myself. My hands shook too badly to hold the steering wheel anymore. I pressed my forehead against it, breathing hard, trying to remind myself I was still real. But when I looked up, my reflection in the rearview mirror wasn't my own. The face staring back at me was pale, hollow-eyed, lips cracked, a shadow of a man. The hitchhiker. I flinched, jerking the mirror down, but the damage was done. I could still feel his gaze crawling over my skin. That was when the RV went silent. The hum of the engine cut out, the dashboard lights flickered and died. I twisted the key, but nothing responded. The silence pressed against my ears heavier than the forest itself, and then I heard it, the sound of footsteps on gravel. I looked out the window, and there he was. Standing in the turnout, fog curling around his legs. His hood was pulled low, but I could see his mouth moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. He lifted his hand again, palm outstretched, and slowly pressed it against the side of the RV. The metal groaned under the touch, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the frame. I scrambled back from the window, flashlight in hand, though the beam felt pitiful against the thick fog. The walls trembled as more hands appeared, pressing from every direction, pushing inward. Pale outlines of faces began to form against the glass, their features shifting like wax melting in heat. I shouted, voice cracking, "What do you want from me?" This time the voices answered, not a whisper, not a plea, but a chorus that filled the air, vibrating through my bones. To carry us. My chest tightened, every breath shallow and burning. I stumbled toward the back of the RV, searching for anything, some way to break free. The air smelled like rot and rust, heavy enough to choke. The walls pulsed with pressure, the ceiling sagging as though something was pushing down. My vision blurred, spots of white flashing at the edges. And then I remembered something my father used to tell me. He always said the redwoods weren't just trees, they were guardians, older than memory, keepers of everything people left behind. They'll hold your secrets, he'd say, but they'll hold your ghosts too. If the forest had given me these hitchhikers, maybe the forest could take them back. I grabbed the keys again, praying the engine would catch. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the RV roared to life, lights flooding the fog. I slammed it into gear and tore back onto the highway, the frame rattling under invisible weight. My only thought was to find a place where the trees were thickest, where the forest stood tallest. The road narrowed, twisting through towering redwoods that seemed to lean closer with every mile. The fog clung like wet cloth, but the trunks were unmistakable, rising into the sky like stone pillars. I pressed harder on the gas, the RV shuddering as though it wanted to shake me loose. The voices grew louder, filling every corner of the RV, each one calling my name, demanding I stop. But I didn't. I couldn't. I slammed the brakes and veered off the road into a dirt clearing, nearly toppling the RV as it jolted to a stop among the giants. I stumbled out, flashlight clutched in my hand, breath tearing through my chest. The fog hung low, but the trees towered, their presence overwhelming. For a moment the voices faltered, quieted, as though even they were afraid. The hitchhiker stood at the edge of the clearing, his hood fallen back, his face gray and cracked. He stepped forward, each movement slow, deliberate, his hollow eyes locked on mine. I raised the flashlight like it could ward him off, though we both knew it wouldn't. My voice shook as I shouted, "You don't belong to me. You belong here. This is where you stay." For the first time, he paused. His head tilted, as though considering. Then he opened his mouth, and the voices of dozens poured out at once, overlapping until the sound was unbearable. My knees buckled under the weight of it. I forced myself to stand, to hold my ground. "You're not mine to carry," I screamed, throat raw. "Stay in the forest. Stay where you belong." The air split with a sound like shattering glass. The fog surged, swallowing the clearing. Figures materialized in the mist. Dozens, hundreds, all the hitchhikers I had seen along the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths moving in unison. They reached toward me, but instead of pulling me in, their arms turned toward the trees. One by one, they sank back into the bark, their bodies dissolving into the redwoods as if the forest itself was reclaiming them. The hitchhiker was the last. He stood there, watching me with those hollow eyes, his lips trembling as though caught between anger and relief. For a heartbeat, I thought he might lunge forward. Instead, he raised his hand in a gesture almost like thanks, or maybe farewell. Then the fog closed around him and he was gone. The clearing fell silent. The air lightened, the metallic stench fading into the damp earth and resin of the trees. My knees gave out and I collapsed against the RV, sobbing until my throat burned. When I finally gathered the strength to climb back inside, the RV was still. No voices, no whispers, no weight pressing in. Just silence, deep and vast. I sat in the driver's seat until the sky brightened to full morning, the light threading through the redwoods like golden veins. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the trees. Eventually, I turned the key, and the RV started clean, smooth, as if nothing had ever happened. I drove south again, this time slower, watching the forest roll past. I didn't see any more hitchhikers. But even now, months later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, sure I hear that faint knocking at the door. I've learned something, though. The road is full of stories, and not all of them are ours to carry. Some belong to the forest, and some belong to the dead. And if you're not careful, they'll ride with you until you can't tell the difference. So if you're ever driving Route 101 and you see someone standing in the fog with their thumb outstretched, don't stop. No matter how much you want to help, no matter how lonely the road feels, because once you let them in, they'll never leave. And trust me, some rides are never meant to be given. I never thought silence could feel heavier than sound. But that night in the mountains, silence was a weight pressing down on my chest, pinning me to the seat of my Volkswagen camper. My name's Ethan, I'm 37, and I've been camping for more than half my life. I've slept under stars in deserts, in the thick humidity of southern swamps, and in forests so dense that the sunlight barely touched the ground. But nothing prepared me for the way silence carried a warning in those woods, or how it felt when I finally realized that something was in that silence, listening. I'd taken my VW out to the northern Rockies, near a town most maps didn't even bother to label. I liked places like that. Small towns with one gas station, a diner with waitresses who knew your name by the second day, and a general store stocked with everything from canned beans to old fishing lures. The locals had that way about them, too. Friendly but clipped, like they were glad for your business, but didn't want you asking too many questions. I used to chalk it up to mountain life, the kind where people protected their solitude like it was sacred. I didn't realize until later that it wasn't solitude they were protecting, it was survival. The road up to the camp had been a challenge, even for someone like me who knew how to coax my van through mud, gravel, and steep switchbacks. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was already bleeding into the ridges, casting the tree line in long, jagged shadows. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing with fire rings left behind by hunters and a few makeshift trails disappearing into the brush. Exactly the kind of place I liked. Secluded, quiet, unbothered. I'd been warned about the cabins up there. An old man at the diner had leaned in when I mentioned heading toward the ridge. Plenty of flat land for parking, he said, but don't go past the cabins. Folks that did, well, they didn't stay long. He said it like he was giving advice about which fishing hole was better, not like he was hinting at something darker. I laughed it off. Cabins in the woods weren't exactly new to me. I'd stayed in them, broken into them, seen the leftovers of families who used them in hunting season. To me, cabins were just another part of the wilderness, the human fingerprint on wild land. But when he said didn't stay long, I should have listened closer. I should have asked what he meant. The first night was uneventful. I set up camp, cooked beans over a small fire, and leaned back against my van, watching the sky bruise into purple, then black. The air smelled sharp, like pine and wet soil, and the silence was so complete I could hear the scrape of beetles under bark if I paid attention. Sleep came easy, the kind where the earth itself feels like it's rocking you. But the second night, the air changed. Not the temperature, not the smell. Something subtler. I could feel the silence now, like a hum that wasn't a sound but a sensation crawling under my skin. My instincts twitched. Every camper knows the difference between peace and warning, though you don't always admit it. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just me getting jumpy being this far off grid. But then I noticed something strange. No wind. Not a whisper. The treetops didn't sway. The grass lay flat. Even the insects were quiet. That hum in my chest grew stronger. My fire cracked and popped like it was apologizing for breaking the silence. But when it died down, I was left alone in stillness, so total it made me shiver. I turned my headlamp toward the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Cabins. Just barely visible through the pines, their shapes carved out in shadow. 4 of them, maybe 5, lined in a crooked row up the slope. Their roofs sagged with rot, chimneys crumbled, windows black and hollow like eye sockets. I knew they weren't there the day before. The clearing had looked empty when I arrived. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself I just missed them, that I hadn't looked hard enough. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I told myself I'd stay by my van. I told myself curiosity was what killed people in the woods. But sometime past midnight, I woke to a sound so small I almost thought I dreamed it. A knock. 3 of them. Slow. Deliberate. Not on my van, but out there. From one of those cabins, I froze, barely breathing. The silence after the knock was worse than the knock itself. It stretched, pulled, pressed against my ears until I felt dizzy. I wanted to grab my keys, fire up the engine, and get out of there, but fear pinned me harder than any seatbelt. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Closer this time. Like the sound had carried from one cabin down to the next. I remember whispering to myself out loud, though no one was listening, "It's just the wood settling, just the wind." But there was no wind, and the knocks had rhythm, purpose. I clenched my fists so tight my nails cut into my palms, and I waited. At some point, the silence deepened again. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, the sun was already spilling over the ridge. Morning should have brought relief, but when I looked toward the cabins, I swore they were closer. Not just closer, different. The one nearest the clearing now had a door bore wide open, its darkness yawning toward me like an invitation. I packed my gear fast, stuffing things into bags without care. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But my van, my lifeline, wouldn't start. Battery was fine, gas was fine. It cranked, coughed, but didn't turn over. And the strangest thing, my headlights flickered on by themselves. Not bright, just dim, like eyes trying to open after a long sleep. That's when I realized whatever had knocked, whatever had opened that door, it wanted me to see. It wanted me to notice. The rest of that morning, I tried to act rational, checked spark plugs, checked lines, even considered rolling the van down the slope to bump start it. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I glanced at the cabins, the open doorway seemed darker, deeper, as if the forest itself leaned back from it. I thought about the old man's words, didn't stay long. I should have left on foot. I should have grabbed my pack and walked the 10 miles back to town, but some part of me refused to leave the van behind. That van was my home, my safety net. Leaving it felt like leaving my lifeline in the hands of whatever lived in those cabins. So I stayed. By sundown, I'd worked myself into exhaustion. The van still wouldn't start. The fire burned small and weak. My head ached from the silence, from the constant weight of it pressing against me. And then the knocks started again. 3. This time they came not from the cabins, but from the trees right beside my clearing. 3 knocks. I felt them more than I heard them. My skin prickled, my ribs vibrated like the sound had been struck into me instead of into the wood. My headlamp swung toward the tree line, but all it showed was bark, rough, gray, pocked with lichen. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The silence afterward was unbearable. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear pushing against a trunk, or an elk rubbing its antlers. But deep down I knew. Animals don't knock. They don't time the spaces between beats so perfectly, like a signal, like someone waiting for an answer. I gripped my flashlight so tight I thought it would snap. Every ounce of me screamed not to move, not to give myself away. But curiosity, or maybe denial, made me step toward the sound. My boots crushed pine needles that seemed far too loud, echoing in the stillness. I stopped a few feet from the tree line and held my breath, waiting. That's when I smelled it. Not the sharp, resinous scent of pine. Not smoke. Something damp, rotted, like earth dug up from a grave. It seeped out of the dark between the trees, thick and sour, curling into my lungs until I gagged. I stumbled back, trying to keep my balance when a shape flickered between the trees. Not a full figure, not even enough to say for sure it was human. Just movement, darker than the darkness itself, gliding from one trunk to the next. I backed up all the way to my van, hand on the metal like it might ground me. My voice broke as I whispered into the emptiness, "Who's there?" Silence answered. But then, another knock, this time from inside one of the cabins. My stomach lurched. The knocks weren't just moving closer, they were circling me, hurting me. I tried the van again, slamming the key so hard it scraped the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. My headlights blinked once, off then on, dim. And I swear to you, in that faint glow, the outline of the nearest cabin door shifted. It wasn't just open anymore. Something leaned in the doorway, its edges blurring with shadow, its height just wrong enough that my brain refused to label it human. I killed the lights, heart hammering. Darkness swallowed everything again. I pressed my back to the van and slid down until I was sitting in the dirt. I told myself to wait for morning, just hold out until sunrise. That's what I repeated in my head like a mantra. Hold out, hold out, hold out. But the night didn't let me rest. Sometime after midnight, I woke to footsteps. Not crunching, not stomping, bare feet padding through needles and soil. Slow, careful. They circled the van once, twice, the rhythm like a predator tracing the edges of its cage. I pressed my hand over my mouth to smother my breath. When the footsteps stopped, the silence returned sharper than before, like glass ready to shatter. Then came a new sound. Whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Low, coaxing, almost tender, like a parent humming a lullaby. The voice rose and fell in patterns too deliberate to be the wind. And the worst part, I realized it wasn't coming from one place. It was all around me, seeping from the cabins, the trees, maybe even the ground. I clamped my eyes shut. Fear makes you bargain. I told myself if I didn't look, it couldn't see me. But then I felt it. Pressure on the side of the van, like a hand sliding down the metal, fingertips dragging just enough to screech against paint. The sound carved into me, each inch a reminder that something stood inches away. My entire body froze, waiting for the next scrape. And then, knock. 3, this time against the door of my van. I don't remember moving, but somehow I ended up in the driver's seat, keys trembling in my hand. I turned them again and again, begging, swearing, crying. On the 7th or 8th try, the engine roared to life. Relief surged so violently through me I nearly sobbed. But when my headlights flared full, I wished I hadn't succeeded. Every cabin door stood wide open now, and in each doorway something stood. Not men, not women, not anything I'd seen before. Their limbs were too long, their heads tilted at angles that hurt to look at, and their eyes, God, their eyes were nothing but holes where light drowned. And yet they stared. They stared so hard, I felt myself shrinking inside my own skin. I slammed the van into reverse, wheels spitting dirt, and tore out of the clearing. Branches scraped against the sides like claws as I barreled down the slope. My headlights bounced across trees, and every flash showed more figures between the trunks, running parallel, keeping pace without sound. The road twisted, sharp turns threatening to send me off the edge, but adrenaline overrode caution. I didn't care if I cracked an axle or blew a tire, I just needed to get out. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the faint glow of the town's lights through the trees. Civilization. Safety. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart stopped. There was a face in the back window. Not pressed against the glass, not snarling or screaming, just watching. Hollow-eyed, tilted, and I swear I recognized the rhythm of its stare. It was waiting. I didn't stop driving until I hit the diner's parking lot, tires screeching against pavement. I stumbled out, legs buckling, gasping like I'd outrun death itself. A couple of locals outside froze when they saw me, their cigarettes dangling midair. One of them, the old man from before, just nodded like he'd been expecting me. Cabins, I croaked, the word tearing out of me. He spat into the dirt. Told you not to go past them. I tried to explain, to demand answers, but my voice broke. He just shook his head. Some places don't want visitors, and some visitors don't come back. You're lucky. Lucky, that's what he called it. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean like those cabins' windows. Even days later, safe in another town, I couldn't shake the smell of rot or the weight of silence pressing into me. My van worked fine after that night. Engine smooth, lights normal, like nothing had happened. Except every now and then, parked in a quiet spot, I still hear it. 3 knocks. And I know, no matter how far I drive, no matter how many miles I put between me and those cabins, they're still with me. I tried to tell myself leaving that town would put everything behind me, that once the ridge was gone in my rearview mirror, the cabins would be gone too. But when you felt something standing outside your van, knocking just to see if you'll answer, you don't forget it. You don't outrun it. It follows you, not on the road, not on a map, but in the part of your mind where silence has a voice. I drove for hours that morning, farther than I'd meant to. Every gas station felt too bright, too exposed. Every passerby felt like they knew, like they were waiting for me to admit what I'd seen. I avoided people's eyes. I kept driving until the sun fell again, exhaustion dragging me toward a state where I had to stop. I pulled into a roadside turnout, flat and open, no trees in sight. It should have felt safe. But the second I killed the engine, the quiet returned. Different quiet. Not mountain silence, not forest stillness. This was vacancy. Hollow. Like something had gutted the world around me. I sat in the driver's seat long after the engine ticked cool, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes burning holes into the empty horizon. No cabins here, no figures in doorways, just open air, cracked asphalt, and the whisper of wind. Yet the hair on my arms stood on end, because I knew what came next. Knock. 3. It came from under the van. I shot upright, banging my head against the ceiling. My breath came fast and ragged. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and flicked it on, pointing it down at the floor like I could see through steel. The knocks didn't repeat, but the pressure lingered in my chest, like something had rapped on my ribs instead of my van. I didn't sleep. I just sat there all night, flashlight in my lap, eyes darting to the mirrors. Nothing showed, but I couldn't shake the sense of being watched from angles I couldn't reach. Dawn came gray and thin, but it might as well have been salvation. I left the turnout behind with my hands trembling on the wheel. My van hummed steady, no issues, no flickers. Normal. But what is normal once you've looked into the dark of a cabin and seen something standing there? Once you've heard your sanctuary tapped on like a door waiting to be opened? I made it to a larger town by noon and checked into a campground. An actual one, with hookups, families in fifth wheels, retirees sitting in folding chairs. Laughter drifted through the air. Dogs barked. Children rode bikes between rows of campers. It was noise. Blessed human noise. I thought maybe that would fix me. Maybe normalcy would drown out the knocks. I sat outside my van with a paper cup of coffee, forcing myself to listen to the chatter around me, to root myself in reality. And for a few hours, it worked. Until night came. I lay in my bunk, the hum of distant generators and crickets buzzing outside, familiar, safe sounds. But beneath it, I felt something rise, like a low vibration just under hearing. My heart started pounding even before the sound came. Knock. Not loud. Not obvious. Just 3 soft raps from the side panel, low near the wheel well. I jolted upright, my head slamming against the roof. My ears rang with it, though no one else in the campground stirred. No dogs barked, no children cried. Just me, sitting in my van, listening to silence swallowing every trace of life outside. I forced the door open, flashlight slicing the night. Rows of campers stood still, no curtains twitching, no people emerging. I circled my van, crouched, checked every panel. Nothing. My knees hit the dirt as I stared underneath, and that's when I saw it. Not a person, not an animal, just 3 marks. Impressions in the dust beneath my van, too large for a hand, too deliberate for a random scuff. 3 perfect circles pressed into the earth, side by side. I backed away until my shoulders slammed against the van. My throat tightened, air catching sharp. One of the retirees across the lot stirred then, stepping out in his slippers, squinting at me like I was a lunatic. "You all right there?" He called softly. I nodded too fast. "Yeah, just checking something." My voice cracked. He shrugged and went back inside. That was it. No one else had heard. No one else had seen. I sat awake the rest of the night, staring at those marks until morning light erased them. But even with daylight, I knew they hadn't gone anywhere. They just sunk deeper, waiting. The next day, I tried to convince myself to keep moving. If I kept driving, maybe I could outpace whatever this was. States, miles, oceans, it didn't matter. But when I climbed into the driver's seat, I froze. On the dashboard, balanced neatly where I couldn't miss it, lay a splinter of wood. Old, dark with age, too perfectly square to be an accident. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The grain was familiar, though I didn't want to admit it. It looked like the same wood as the cabins. I dropped it like it had burned me. The splinter clattered onto the floor mat and sat there like a piece of evidence. Proof that it wasn't in my head. Proof that the cabins hadn't stayed behind. I thought about throwing it out, but some instinct told me it wouldn't matter. Whatever left it wanted me to know it could follow, wherever I went. I drove on, but something inside me cracked that day. I stopped talking to people. I stopped staying in campgrounds. I stuck to back roads and empty pullouts, thinking maybe if I isolated myself, I could keep others safe. Because what scared me most wasn't that it followed me, it was that maybe it wanted me to bring others into its silence too. The next week blurred. Sleep became fragments, minutes stolen at dawn or dusk. Every night the knocks came, sometimes faint, sometimes hard enough to rattle a panel. Always 3, always patient, like it had all the time in the world to wait for me to open the door. And the whispering, God, the whispering grew clearer, words forming through the static of silence. I'd lie awake, staring into the dark, listening to a voice I almost recognized, a voice that sounded like someone I'd lost years ago. "Ethan," it whispered. The first time it said my name, I nearly ripped the door open just to see, but instinct, raw and primal, kept me pinned. I knew if I looked, I wouldn't come back. I don't know how long I can keep this up. I don't know if the road will ever be long enough, if the miles will ever run out before I do. All I know is the silence is growing louder. The cabins weren't just places in the woods. They were doors. And I think I knocked back. The road stretched on like a ribbon of gray unraveling under me. But it didn't matter how far I drove. The silence kept pace. It wasn't just the knocks anymore. It was the sense that the world around me had thinned. Like reality itself was only a veneer, and the cabins were pressing from the other side, waiting for me to slip through. I started counting the miles not in hours or gas stops, but in knocks. One night, 3 raps from the back panel. Another 3 against the roof. Then a week later, 3 against the window right beside my bed. Each one closer, each one more deliberate. I told myself to stay strong, to remember who I was, my name, my life, the places I'd been, but even that started to unravel. Sometimes I'd wake up behind the wheel without memory of starting the van. Other times I'd find things in the passenger seat, twigs, scraps of paper, once even a child's shoe damp with soil. I'd throw them out, but more always came. Little reminders, souvenirs of silence. One night, somewhere in Utah's desert, I thought I'd finally lost it. The land was flat, endless, the stars sharp enough to cut. I parked on a barren stretch of dirt road and told myself, if the knocks come here, it means it's inside me now. I waited. Midnight came. No wind, no bugs, Just silence swallowing the desert whole. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, and then knock. 3. But this time I didn't just hear it, I felt it in my bones like the knocks had rung through my ribs. And worse, they came from inside the van. I froze, eyes darting across the walls. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. But the air grew heavy, pressing down, thick with the smell of earth and rot. And in the silence, a whisper unfurled. Open. It wasn't my name this time. It was a command. Gentle, coaxing, like a hand outstretched. I sat paralyzed, every instinct screaming no, but another voice inside me, my own voice, argued back. What if it's someone trapped? What if it's someone who needs you? That's how it worked, I realized. That's how it got people. Not with force, with suggestion, with the right word and the right silence, making you doubt your own fear. I gripped the door handle. For a second, I thought I'd give in. My body wanted to. My hand twitched, slick with sweat, ready to turn the latch. But something stronger pulled me back. Not reason, not survival. Memory. I remembered my father teaching me how to camp when I was a kid. His words, "The wild doesn't want to kill you. It just doesn't care if you die. It's people who trick you, people who make you forget yourself." And in that moment, I realized whatever stood outside wasn't human, but it understood people better than people did. I yanked my hand away from the door, heart hammering so hard I thought it might tear free. "No," I rasped into the silence. The whisper stopped. The air eased. For a moment I thought I'd won, but then came the sound of something moving, slow, dragging, down the length of the van. Fingers, maybe. Nails. Each scrape deliberate, patient, like it was marking the steel, reminding me it wasn't finished. That night I didn't sleep. By dawn, I was shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked hollow, eyes ringed with shadows, face drawn like I'd aged years. I thought about turning myself in somewhere, a hospital, a church, even the sheriff's office in some backwater town, telling someone, anyone, that I wasn't safe to be around. But what could I say? There are cabins that move through the woods and things that knock just to see if you'll answer. They'd lock me up. And maybe that was what it wanted, because isolation is one thing, confinement is another. So I drove on and on, until one night in the red cliffs of Arizona, exhaustion broke me. I stopped at a lonely pullout overlooking a canyon, stars bleeding across the sky, and whispered to myself, if it wants me, let it come. I can't run anymore. Silence answered. And then the knocks came. Not 3 this time, just 1. Heavy, final. The van shuddered with it. My chest did too. I closed my eyes, waiting for the whisper, the scrape, the pressure. But none came. Instead, I felt something shift inside me. Not a possession, not an invasion, a realization. The knocks weren't just warnings. They weren't threats. They were invitations. Doors opening, not into cabins, but into fear itself. The only reason it followed me was because I kept listening, kept letting silence speak louder than myself. I sat up, heart steadying for the first time in weeks, and whispered back, no more. The night held its breath. The silence pressed, but I pressed back, and for the first time the air broke, not with whispers, not with knocks, but with the sound of wind sighing through the canyon. Real wind, I laughed then, a ragged, broken laugh, but real. I don't know if I beat it or if it just moved on to someone weaker. I don't know if the cabins are still waiting, doors open, shadows tilting their heads, but I do know this. I never heard the knocks again after that night. Even now, years later, parked in quiet forests or open deserts, sometimes wake in the dark, my heart pounding, listening for the silence. But it's never the same silence. It's natural again, alive with bugs, with owls, with the groan of branches. What I faced out there wasn't about the cabins. It wasn't about the things standing in their doorways. It was about what happens when you let fear open a door inside you and invite something in. So if you ever find yourself on a ridge staring at cabins that weren't there before, and you hear 3 knocks in the night, remember this: fear will tell you to answer. Fear will tell you it might be nothing or it might be someone who needs help. But if you do, you won't come back the same. Close the door, hold your ground, and never, ever knock back. Because some invitations don't lead to shelter, they lead to silence, and silence doesn't let go. People like to believe fear fades with time, that the sharp edges dull, the nightmares stop, the mind files things away into the cabinet of memory where they can't hurt you anymore. But that isn't true. Some fears don't fade, they shift. They become quieter, subtler, hiding in the ordinary until you're not sure if you've moved on or if it's just waiting for the right silence to remind you. I've lived on the road for years, since those nights. My Volkswagen is still with me, patched and repaired more times than I can count. The paint bears scars from branches and weather, but the worst marks aren't visible to anyone else. They live in me. In the way I still flinch when the world goes too quiet. In the way I can't sleep with the van in total darkness anymore. I always leave a lantern burning, no matter how faint. I never told the full story to anyone in person. I've given fragments, strange night up in the Rockies, or heard things I couldn't explain, but never the whole thing. Because the truth isn't something people want to hear. Campers trade ghost stories like candy around fires. But when something really follows you, when it scratches itself into your life, you learn fast that silence isn't just an absence of sound. It's a presence. Sometimes I think back to that old man at the diner, the way he said, "Folks that didn't stay long." I wonder how many before me sat in their vans or cabins, hearing those knocks, convincing themselves it was nothing until they answered. I wonder how many never came back. And whether the locals don't talk about it because they're afraid, or because they know the silence needs fresh ears to grow. I've had nights since then where I swear I hear it again. Not the knocks, thank God, not the knocks, but the potential for them. Like the air is testing me, waiting to see if I'll crack. A campsite in Oregon where the forest pressed too close, too thick. A desert turnout in Nevada where the stars seem to hang lower than they should. Even in the Everglades, wrapped in humidity and insect buzz, I felt it, that edge of stillness. The hush before the first rap. Each time, I tell myself the same thing. Don't answer. Don't knock back. And each time the air eventually exhales, sound returns, life trickles back in. I think that's the only reason I'm still here. But survival isn't the same as peace. Survival is living with the weight of knowing. Knowing there are places in this country where the cabins wait, not as structures, but as ideas. Doors where none should be. Openings into something older than people. Maybe they were always there. Maybe we built around them, never realizing we'd left a threshold yawning between the trees. Sometimes I catch myself staring at people in campgrounds, wondering if they've heard it too. The way their heads jerk at a sound too soft for anyone else to notice. The way they sit awake long after everyone else is asleep. Maybe I'm not alone in this. Maybe the silence doesn't just follow one person at a time. Maybe it's spreading, knock by knock, waiting for someone to be weak enough to listen. There are nights when the temptation still whispers, not in voices anymore, not in commands, but in my own doubt. What if you had opened the door? What if it wasn't malice, but knowledge? What if you denied yourself something greater? Fear has a way of turning itself into curiosity when it thinks you're tired enough to listen, and curiosity is just another door. I keep a journal now, not for stories, not for miles, not for the campsites I find, just for the silences. Every time the world goes still, I write it down, where I was, what it felt like, how long it lasted. Some are short, seconds, maybe. Others stretch long enough to make me sweat. I don't know if the journal is a safeguard or an invitation, but writing it out reminds me I'm still on this side of the door. The Volkswagen itself has become something more than a home to me. It's both sanctuary and trap, a place that carried me out of the mountains, and yet a place where the knocks landed hardest. I've thought about selling it, buying something new, shedding the skin of those memories, but I can't. Because the truth is, I don't trust a new set of walls. At least this van has learned what's out there. At least this one knows how to withstand the silence. There's one last memory I haven't said out loud until now That final night in Arizona when I told the silence no more, and the wind returned, I heard something faint. Not a knock, not a whisper, just a sound like a door closing far away. Heavy, final. It carried through the canyon like thunder. I tell myself that was the end of it, that I closed it, locked it, left it behind. But there's a part of me that wonders if doors like that ever truly shut. If they're not waiting for the next person to stumble too close, to spend too long in the wrong clearing, to doubt themselves in the wrong silence. So when people ask me why I camp alone, why I avoid the popular grounds and the crowds, I give them the polite answers. Freedom, solitude, connection with the wild. But the truth is simpler. I don't want to risk someone else hearing it, because fear shared is contagious, and silence spreads faster than fire. If you're out there in your own rig, parked on some forgotten road, listening to the hush of the woods, remember this. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's a door, and sometimes if you let it, it will knock back. And when it does, the only thing standing between the cabins is your refusal to answer. So don't answer. Don't knock back. Live with the silence, but don't let it live in you. That's how you stay on this side of the door. That's how you keep the wild from swallowing more than just your body. That's how you come home. The first time I heard the name Death Hollow, I laughed. It sounded like the kind of overblown title locals slapped onto places to keep tourists from trampling through. But that laugh sticks in my throat now, like gravel, because I know exactly why that canyon bears its name. My name is Eric. I'm 36, and last summer I joined 3 friends for what was supposed to be a simple camping trip in southern Utah. We thought we were ready for the isolation, the heat, the way the desert swallows sound. But there's no preparation for a place that watches you, no training that teaches you how to keep your mind steady when the earth itself seems to close around you. We started in Escalante, a town so small you could walk its entire length in an hour. Locals there talk with a kind of weary patience, especially when it comes to outsiders eager to push into the wilderness. I remember the woman at the gas station when we asked about the trailhead. She squinted, lips pressed thin, then muttered, "Don't camp in the hollow. Stay high, stay near the rim. It's not a place to sleep." My friend Lucas chuckled as if she were warning us about coyotes, but her eyes didn't leave mine. There was no smirk, no exaggeration in her voice. It was a warning carried like a burden. I should have paid attention. Instead, I stuffed the map into my pocket and shrugged it off. Death Hollow is carved deep into the sandstone, a ribbon of green slicing through red desert cliffs. From above, it looks like a scar, raw, jagged, unhealed. The descent into it is steep, and by the time we wound our way down into the canyon floor, the air felt different. Cooler, damper, but heavier too. It smelled of moss and something sour, like stagnant water, though the stream still ran clear over polished stone. The moment we entered, the world narrowed. The towering cliffs blocked the sun, trapping shadows even at noon. My chest tightened, but I told myself it was just the shift in air pressure, just the body adjusting to altitude and confinement. That was the first of many lies I fed myself. I camped with Lucas, his younger sister Renee, and my best friend from college, Sean. We'd been RV camping for years, moving from forest to desert, chasing new places, new stories. But this time was different. Our RV couldn't make it anywhere near the hollow, so we left it parked by the highway and hiked in, carrying tents and packs heavy enough to bite into our shoulders. I thought the difficulty was the worst of it. The climb down, the humidity, the constant sound of water dripping from unseen cracks in the rock. But the hollow is not a place you endure physically. It wears at your mind, peeling you back until your thoughts are raw. That first night, we pitched our tents near the stream. It should have felt peaceful. A ribbon of water, the croak of frogs, the hum of insects. But the sound carried strangely, echoing off the canyon walls, repeating in patterns that didn't match the rhythms of nature. A frog's call would bounce back seconds later, altered, deeper. My skin prickled as I listened. Renee said the cliffs must be shaping the sound, turning ordinary noises into something uncanny. I wanted to believe her, but when I lay in my tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, I swore I heard footsteps crunching over the gravel just beyond the flap. I told myself it was Sean taking a late walk, but when I called his name, no one answered. The footsteps stopped. Then the silence thickened, pressing into my eardrums until I could hear my own pulse. I didn't sleep. Not really. The next morning, the others seemed fine. They laughed, brewed coffee over a small flame, dipped their faces into the stream to wash off sweat. No one mentioned hearing anything, so I kept quiet, too. It felt childish, like admitting I was scared of the dark. But when Lucas said, "Let's stay another night down here before heading further," my stomach clenched. I wanted to say no, wanted to insist we set camp higher up, away from the water, away from the shadows that pooled like oil under the cliffs. But I didn't. I bit my tongue. The day blurred into hiking and swimming. The canyon grew tighter the deeper we went, the walls leaning in, narrowing the sky. At times I felt as if we were walking into a throat that would close behind us. Renee carved her name into the bark of a cottonwood tree, the letters raw and jagged. "Proof we were here," she said. I smiled, but inside I felt dread. Proof for who? Why would we need to leave proof? The thought stuck with me as the light dimmed. That night, the air turned cold fast, sharper than it had any right to be in July. I woke to a smell, not the mossy damp from before, but something rank, like meat left out in the sun. My first thought was an animal carcass nearby. Then came the sound, a steady knock, 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 echoing off the stone. Slow, deliberate, not the rhythm of woodpeckers or branches. It came from the walls themselves, carrying like a heartbeat through the canyon. Sean unzipped his tent and muttered, "What the hell is that?" None of us answered. We just sat there, four pale faces in the moonlight, listening to the rock itself pulse with noise. Lucas, ever the brave one, grabbed his headlamp and followed the sound toward the cliff. I wanted to stop him, but my throat locked. I could only watch as his beam of light jittered against the sandstone. The knocking stopped when he touched the wall. Then silence so total it swallowed the stream, the frogs, even our breathing. And in that silence, I swear I felt something behind me, close enough that the hairs on my neck lifted. I spun, light shaking in my hand, but nothing moved. Nothing but shadows, longer than they should have been. Lucas came back pale, muttering that it was nothing, just rocks cooling, air expanding. He didn't believe it, though. I could hear the tremor in his voice. We huddled in our tents, the air suffocating, listening for that knock to return. It didn't, but I don't know if that was better, because when it finally came again, it wasn't a knock. It was a whisper. At first, I thought it was Renee talking in her sleep, but the words were too low, stretched thin, scraping like sand across stone. They weren't in English, not in any language I knew. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside, like it crawled through my skull instead of the air. My stomach knotted, and I wanted to run, out of the tent, out of the hollow, out of Utah itself. But my body stayed frozen. I realized then that fear doesn't always make you flee. Sometimes it roots you, pins you down until your thoughts thrash, but your limbs won't obey. By dawn, the whispers stopped. I staggered out, my throat raw as if I'd been shouting all night. Renee looked the same. Her eyes rimmed red, her lips cracked. She asked me quietly, "Did you hear it too?" I nodded. The others didn't meet our gaze. Lucas busied himself with the stove, Sean with packing up. They wouldn't admit it, but I knew they'd heard. Denial is easier than truth in a place like that. We should have left then. Packed everything, climbed out before the canyon closed its teeth. But fear twisted into pride. None of us wanted to be the one to break. None of us wanted to admit we were scared of rocks and echoes, so we stayed. And that was the mistake that ruined everything. The morning sun barely reached the canyon floor, sliding down the stone in thin, golden streaks. I wanted its warmth to calm me, to wash away the sour taste of the night, but the light felt weak, strangled by the cliffs. The air clung heavy, and even as we packed, I felt that something unseen was holding us here. The rational part of me wanted to leave, climb back toward open sky and open ground. But another part, the pride, the need not to look foolish, anchored me. And I think it was that part the hollow fed on. We decided to push deeper, maybe 2 miles further before setting up camp again. Lucas led the way, forcing energy into his stride, but I could see his knuckles white around the straps of his pack. Renee lagged, quieter than she'd ever been, her eyes darting to shadows that spilled between cottonwoods. Sean stuck close to me. Every so often he'd whisper under his breath, not words, just fragments, like he was trying to remind himself he was still real, still grounded. The deeper we went, the more the canyon seemed to shift. The walls tightened, the stream narrowed, and the air cooled until goosebumps crawled across my arms despite the sun overhead. My boots slipped on moss-slick rock, and the sound of our movements ricocheted back at us, distorted. Once, I heard the echo of our footsteps a full beat after we stopped. It wasn't just sound bouncing, it was sound chasing. Around noon, we stopped to eat, crouched on smooth stones by the stream. None of us had much appetite. Renee picked at a protein bar until it crumbled in her hands. Sean kept glancing behind him. Finally, he asked, "Did you guys notice last night when it whispered? Did it sound like it was trying to say your name?" My heart froze. I hadn't admitted it to myself, but yes, that scratchy murmur had twisted into something that almost resembled my name, dragging it out, warping it. Lucas snapped at him. "It was the wind. Don't start with that." But his voice cracked on the last word, and I knew he was lying. Lucas always wanted to be the strong one, the one who turned fear into bravado. But his mask was fraying, and the hollow seemed to notice. By mid-afternoon, we found a grove of cottonwoods with enough flat ground for tents. The stream widened here into a shallow pool, dark with algae. The smell was stronger, sweet, rotten, the stench of something organic left too long. I tried to convince myself it was just stagnant water, but every time the breeze shifted, I gagged. Renee wrinkled her nose and said, "We should move further up." Lucas shook his head. "No, we'll stay. It's fine." He said it too fast, like a kid insisting they weren't scared. That evening, while Sean and I gathered firewood, Renee pulled me aside. Her eyes were wide, the whites streaked with red. "Eric, I saw something in the pool." She pointed at the dark water. "I thought it was a fish at first, but it wasn't. It was pale, like a hand, reaching up." Her voice broke. It disappeared when I blinked. I wanted to tell her she was just tired, that reflections in water can play tricks, but the truth was, I believed her. I had seen the surface ripple too, though no wind stirred, no fish swam. My stomach nodded, but I nodded. "Don't tell Lucas yet. He won't hear it." She agreed, but fear clung to her voice like ash. When night came, the hollow revealed its cruelty again. The knocking returned, softer this time, almost tentative, as if whatever made it was drawing closer. Then came the whispers, sliding between the trees, curling through the tents. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The words weren't in sound, they were inside. This time they were clearer, dragging syllables into shapes. And one shape was unmistakable. My name, Eric. The voice scraped against my skull like stone on stone. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real." But when I opened them, the tent fabric above me rippled like something heavy brushed against it. My heart stopped. I lay frozen, waiting for it to collapse inward, waiting for hands or claws or whatever it was to tear through. But nothing came. The rippling faded. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. In the morning, Sean was gone. His tent was unzipped, his sleeping bag empty, his boots missing. Panic surged through us. We tore through the grove, shouting his name, voices cracking against the cliffs. Only echoes answered, slurred, delayed, not quite ours. The stream gurgled like it was mocking us. Renee clung to me, trembling. "We have to go. We have to leave now." Lucas refused. He said Sean must have wandered off, maybe to clear his head, maybe to follow the trail. He insisted we pack up and search deeper. But something in his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He was unraveling. We found Sean's footprints by the pool. They led into the water, not beside it, not around it, into it. The track sank into the mud and disappeared beneath the dark surface. My stomach turned cold. The water was too shallow to hide a body, but it was deep enough to swallow those prints whole. Renee broke down crying. Lucas refused to look at the ground. He'd probably crossed here, he muttered. But there were no prints on the other side. We should have fled then, but the canyon had us. I don't know if it was stubbornness, fear of leaving Sean behind, or something stronger that rooted us. We stayed, as if the hollow whispered to each of us in a voice tailored to our weakness. That night, I dreamed, or maybe it wasn't a dream, that I heard Sean's voice. He was calling for help, his words stretched thin, bubbling as if through water. I stumbled out of the tent, heart racing, and saw movement by the pool. The moonlight shimmered off the surface, and there he was, standing waist deep, his face pale, eyes black holes. "Help me," he croaked. His voice was wrong, staggered, like someone learning how to use a tongue. I stepped forward before something in me screamed to stop. The water rippled, and his body flickered like a reflection. Then he was gone. Only the pool remained, dark and still. I stumbled back, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. Renee emerged from her tent, whispering, "You saw him too, didn't you?" Her face was ghost white. I didn't answer. By dawn, we were husks. None of us ate. Lucas's hands shook as he tried to light the stove, dropping matches into the dirt. Renee refused to go near the pool, and I kept staring at the cliffs, certain I could see shapes moving along the walls. Not animals, not shadows, but outlines of people, carved into the rock and shifting when I looked too long. We couldn't deny it anymore. The hollow wasn't just canyon and stone. It was alive. It wanted us. And one of us was already gone. The third morning, the air was colder than it should have been. A white mist curled off the stream, crawling low across the stones like smoke. It clung to our clothes, dampening fabric, chilling skin. I tried to shake it off, but it stayed, seeping into my lungs, into my thoughts. Renee wouldn't leave her tent. She sat inside with the flap half-zipped, rocking back and forth, whispering to herself. I caught fragments when the breeze shifted. Her own name, repeated again and again, as though she was trying to remind herself it was still hers to keep. Lucas, though, was changing in a different way. He woke stiff, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, speaking with that brittle confidence that made my stomach twist. "We're moving further," he said. "We're not going back until we find him." He didn't need to name Sean. His obsession was obvious, dangerous. I wanted to argue, to grab Renee and climb out of that cursed canyon, but the truth was, I didn't trust myself to find the way anymore. The trail we'd followed in seemed to warp in my memory. Each bend in the cliffs looked like the last, each grove of trees identical. I couldn't tell whether it was the hollow or my own mind betraying me. We packed in silence. The mist thinned as the sun crawled higher, but the air didn't warm. My skin felt clammy, like sweat that wouldn't dry. We walked single file, following Lucas as he pushed ahead with manic determination. Renee stumbled often, her body moving as if weighed down by chains. At one point, she tripped and scraped her palm on the rocks. When I helped her up, she clutched my arm with desperate strength. "Eric," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Something's wrong with him. He isn't Lucas anymore." I looked ahead at him, his shoulders hunched, head low, stride stiff and uneven. And she was right. His movements were wrong, like a puppet pulled on crooked strings. But if I said that aloud, it would make it real. So I said nothing. By mid-afternoon, we reached another pool, larger than the first, its surface glassy and black. A cottonwood leaned over it, half its roots dangling into the water. The stench hit us immediately, sweet rot, thick enough to make me gag. Renee covered her mouth, eyes watering. Lucas didn't flinch. He dropped his pack and marched straight to the edge. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cracking. He crouched, staring into the pool. "He's here. Sean's here. I can feel him." Renee whimpered. "Don't. Please don't look." But Lucas leaned further, and I swear the water moved toward him, rippling outward though nothing touched it. His reflection shimmered, stretched, until it wasn't his face anymore. I saw Sean staring up from that black surface, mouth wide, eyes hollow. For a moment, both faces merged, Lucas's and Sean's, and my heart thundered so hard it drowned out everything else. I lunged forward, yanking Lucas back by his pack. He snarled, an animal sound, spinning on me with eyes so wild I barely recognized him. His fist shot out, grazing my jaw, and for a split second I thought he meant to kill me. Then his expression flickered, just enough humanity flashing through for him to stagger backward. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, muttering words I couldn't understand. Renee sobbed, crumpling beside me. "We have to leave. Please, Eric, please." I nodded, trembling. "We're leaving." But leaving was easier said than done. The trail behind us was gone. Or maybe it had never been. Every turn looked wrong. The walls loomed higher, closer, until the canyon felt like a gullet tightening around us. The sun vanished entirely by late afternoon, though the sky above should have been clear. We walked in twilight, guided only by the hiss of the stream. My chest felt crushed, my thoughts unraveling thread by thread. At dusk, we made camp again, though none of us wanted to. Renee wouldn't stop crying, her voice breaking until it was only a rasp. Lucas sat by the pool, staring into nothing, lips moving silently. I watched him from across the fire, my skin crawling. His mouth moved in a rhythm that didn't match words. It matched the knocking. When I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, it was with the fire sputtering low, the sound of water filling my ears. I dreamed, or maybe it wasn't a dream, of being pulled under the surface, lungs filling with cold, dark weight, my body twisting in currents that didn't exist. Hands brushed my arms, my legs tugging, guiding, until I couldn't tell if they were pulling me down or holding me together. Then a voice bloomed in the water, soft and smooth. "Stay. Don't leave. You belong here." I woke gasping, choking on air that felt too thick to breathe. The fire was out. The canyon was black as pitch, and beside me, Renee was gone. I scrambled to my feet, panic flooding every vein. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but no sign of her. My flashlight beam sliced through the dark, catching the glint of water. And then I saw her. She was standing waist-deep in the pool, eyes wide open, her face slack. Her arms were spread as though offering herself to the night. I screamed her name and bolted, splashing into the water. It was freezing, knives stabbing my legs. I grabbed her shoulders and shook hard. "Renee, wake up!" Her head lolled, lips parting, and then her voice came out, but it wasn't hers. "Eric." The sound was low, guttural, dragging my name through a mouth that didn't know how to form it. My blood turned to ice. I shoved her toward the shore, desperate, praying she'd snap out of it. Behind me, the water churned. Something rose beneath the surface, a shape, pale and faceless, fingers stretching upward. I hauled Renee out, collapsing on the bank, and when I turned back, the pool was still again. Nothing remained. Renee gasped, finally her own voice sobbing into my chest. It told me to come. It told me Sean was waiting. I held her, shaking as hard as she was, and whispered, "We're getting out. Tonight. We're not waiting for morning." But then I heard it. From behind us, a soft knock, 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 coming not from the water but from the trees. And when I looked, Lucas was gone. The knocking spread like a pulse through the trees, steady, patient, deliberate. My skin crawled. I grabbed Renee by the arm and whispered, "We have to move." Her eyes darted to the empty space where Lucas had been sitting. The fire pit was cold ash now, and his pack lay abandoned, straps curling like limp limbs. "Eric," she breathed, barely able to speak. "Where did he go?" The answer came in a sound that wasn't human. A low groan echoed from deeper in the canyon, warped by stone until it was both near and far. My stomach twisted. It was Lucas's voice, but stretched hollow, as though the canyon itself had swallowed it and was spitting it back. I pulled Renee to her feet. "We're leaving. Now." We stumbled into the dark, my flashlight cutting weak beams against the cliffs. Every shadow seemed alive, leaning toward us as we passed. The trail was gone, replaced by smooth rock and jagged drops that forced us to climb blindly. Renee tripped, scraping her knees raw, but I dragged her forward. Behind us, the knocking quickened, closing the space between beats. Then, Eric. The voice was behind me, low and guttural, dragging each syllable. I spun, beam shaking, and there he was. Lucas, or what used to be Lucas. He stood in the clearing, his body too still, his head cocked at a strange angle. His eyes reflected white in the beam like an animal's. His mouth moved, but the sound that came out wasn't his own. It was Sean's voice, bubbling and wet. "Help me, Eric," Renee screamed. I yanked her behind me, stumbling backward, the flashlight shaking wildly. Lucas took a step forward, his movements jerky, puppet-like. His skin looked pale, damp, as if he'd crawled from the water. I tried to speak, to reach whatever part of him was left. "Lucas, it's me. It's Eric. You're not—" But he interrupted with a sound that ripped through the canyon. A howl, inhuman, echoing until it seemed to come from every wall at once. My chest tightened, heart slamming against my ribs. I turned and ran, dragging Renee with me. The canyon tilted in my vision as we scrambled over rocks and through brush, the stream rushing loud enough to drown my thoughts. I could hear him behind us, the crunch of footsteps, too heavy, too fast. The knocking followed too, as if the walls themselves were moving with him. We reached a bend where the cliffs rose vertical, smooth, impossible to climb. My breath caught. Dead end. The stream cut into a narrow slit barely wide enough to squeeze through. Without thinking, I shoved Renee ahead of me. "Go, now." She hesitated, terror freezing her in place. Behind us, the shadows rippled with movement. My flashlight beam flickered across Lucas again, closer now, his mouth wide, his chest heaving in jerks that didn't match breath. I shoved Renee harder. "Go!" She squeezed into the slit, scraping skin against rock, vanishing into darkness. I followed, heart hammering, the stone tearing at my shoulders. Behind me, Lucas's hands slammed against the walls with a thunderous crack. His voice bellowed, shaking the air. "Eric!" I clawed forward until my lungs burned, the stone scraping my back raw. The passage tightened, threatening to crush me. My pack snagged. I ripped it off, leaving it wedged behind, and dragged myself through. When the gap finally widened, I collapsed onto the dirt, gasping like I'd surfaced from drowning. Renee crouched nearby, trembling, blood streaking her arms from the climb. He's not him anymore," she whispered, rocking. I wanted to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. My body shook too hard. My mind buzzed with one thought. We weren't out yet. The hollow wasn't done. We stumbled onward. We started following the stream deeper into the slit. The walls pressed so tight we could touch both sides. The darkness here felt alive, wrapping us in a silence thicker than any I'd known. Even the water seemed muffled, swallowed by stone. And then footsteps, not behind us. Ahead. I froze. Renee clutched my sleeve, her nails digging deep. A figure stood at the far end of the passage. My flashlight caught pale skin, wet hair clinging to a face. It was Sean. Or it looked like him. He stood ankle deep in the stream, water dripping from his clothes. "Help me," he whispered, his lips barely moving. Renee gasped, ready to run to him, but I held her back, my whole body screaming no, because his reflection in the water didn't match him. While his body stood still, the reflection twisted, mouth open too wide, eyes hollow. He took a step toward us, and the reflection surged forward faster, rippling against the current. The air grew colder, the stench stronger, and my chest seized as if the canyon itself were pressing down. I killed the flashlight, plunging us into darkness. Renee whimpered, but I held her tight. My ears rang in the silence. Then I heard it, breathing, wet, heavy, inches away. I couldn't think. I just grabbed Renee and shoved us both sideways, pressing into the rock. My shoulders scraped, pain flaring bright, but I didn't care. Something brushed past us in the dark, a hand clammy and cold, dragging across my arm. Renee bit back a scream, trembling so hard I thought she'd shatter. The air shifted, footsteps moving past, deeper into the slit, and then gone. We stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, when silence felt safe, I flicked the flashlight back on. The passage ahead was empty, only water, stone, and the faint shimmer of mist. Renee's face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears. "Eric," she whispered, "we're not getting out, are we?" I wanted to lie, to say yes, but the words stuck. My throat burned with the truth I didn't want to speak. The hollow wasn't letting us leave, not easily. Maybe not at all. Still, I tightened my grip on her hand and forced my voice steady. We're going to keep moving. That's all we can do. Because if we stopped, if we gave in to the terror pressing from every shadow, we'd never take another step. And I wasn't ready to belong to Death Hollow. Not yet. We pressed on, step after step, though every inch of the canyon fought against us. The slit opened into another hollow, wider but darker, the walls arching high above as if we had stumbled into the ribs of some ancient beast. The air reeked of mildew and rot, thick enough to choke. My flashlight beam skittered across boulders and slick roots, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw faces carved into the rock. Eyes, mouths, gaping expressions of grief. When I blinked, they were gone. Renee clung to me, limping slightly, her breathing in shallow bursts. I knew she was breaking, held together only by sheer will. I had to keep her moving. If she collapsed, if either of us stopped, the hollow would swallow us whole. A sound rose above the silence. Not the knocking now, not the whispers, but something worse. Humming, low, melodic, echoing from every corner. It wasn't a tune I recognized, but it curled inside my skull like I'd known it forever. Renee whimpered, pressing her hands to her ears. I felt it too, vibrating through bone. My legs wanted to stop, to sink to the ground and let it take me. But I dragged us both forward, forcing one foot after another, refusing to let that melody root me in place. Then we saw the light. A faint glow ahead, pale and wavering. For a moment, hope surged. Could it be an opening? A way out? We stumbled faster, lungs heaving. The glow grew, spilling from a bend in the canyon. But as we rounded it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the sun, it was fire. Dozens of tiny flames burned in shallow cracks along the walls, flickering like candles. No one had lit them, no one could have, but they burned steady, dripping wax onto the stone. And in the center of the hollow stood Lucas. He turned slowly toward us and my chest tightened. His skin was gray, stretched thin. His eyes glowed faint, catching the firelight, and his mouth moved in that same twisted rhythm. The humming deepened, spreading from him. "Lucas?" I whispered, though I knew it wasn't him anymore. Renee gripped my arm, sobbing quietly. "He's gone, Eric. He's gone." But I couldn't look away. Some part of me still hoped, still wanted to believe. Then he spoke, and it wasn't his voice. It was Sean's again, bubbling and broken, layered with whispers that weren't human. "You shouldn't have come here." The words rattled the walls, had kick eyes. The flames flickered. My flashlight shook in my hand, useless against that glow. Lucas stepped closer, his movements jerky, water dripping from his clothes though he hadn't been near the pool. I backed away, pulling Renee with me, but he followed, each step in perfect time with the knocking that started again, boom, 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 pulsing through the canyon like a heartbeat. "Stay with us," he croaked. "Stay forever." Renee broke then. She screamed and tore free, bolting past me, sprinting toward the opposite wall as if there could be an exit hidden there. Lucas lunged after her, too fast, too wrong. My body moved before my mind. I charged, slamming into him with everything I had. It was like hitting stone, cold, unyielding. He staggered but didn't fall. His head snapped toward me, and for an instant his face shifted. Not Lucas, not Sean, but something older, faceless, its mouth stretching wide enough to split the skin. My vision blurred, bile rising in my throat. I swung the flashlight, smashing it against his shoulder. The beam died, glass shattering, plunging us into firelit shadow. He shrieked, a sound like wind through a cavern, and stumbled back. "Run!" I shouted to Renee. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward a narrow break in the wall I hadn't noticed before, a dark slit beyond the flames. I chased, lungs burning, the ground uneven beneath my boots. Behind us, Lucas's voice twisted into a howl that shook the air. The slit funneled us upward, climbing steeply. My hands scraped stone, knees buckled, but adrenaline drove me. Renee clawed ahead, her sobs echoing against the rock. The knocking followed, closer now, not just from behind but from the walls themselves, as if the canyon wanted to close in and crush us. We burst onto a ledge, gasping. Above us, sky, real sky, faint stars flickering through thin clouds. My chest swelled with desperate hope. We were close. We had to be. But the hollow didn't let go that easily. A voice rose behind us, deep, layered, a chorus of whispers threading together into one. You belong here. Don't leave. The ground trembled. Stones slid from the ledge. Renee screamed as her footing gave way, her body tilting toward the drop. I lunged, grabbing her wrist just in time. Her weight yanked me forward, my chest slamming into the rock. My arms strained, fire in my muscles. She dangled, kicking, shrieking. "Hold on," I roared, though my grip was slipping. Below, shadows writhed along the canyon floor, reaching upward like hands stretching for her. Lucas's voice rose with them, chanting, wordless and broken. The knocking pounded so loud I thought my skull would split. Renee's eyes met mine, wide and desperate. "Don't let me go, Eric. Please." "I won't," I swore, my teeth gritted, my body shaking with the effort. "I won't let go." The stone beneath my knees crumbled. My grip slipped an inch. The shadows surged higher. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't hold on forever. My arms trembled, every tendon in my hands screaming as I clung to Renee. The ledge dug into my ribs, tearing fabric and skin, but I refused to let her slip. The voices below rose into a storm, 1,000 whispers woven into one command. Let go, let go. The shadows clawed upward, writhing against the firelit canyon walls, reaching for her ankles with impossible hunger. Renee thrashed, crying, her nails gouging my wrist as she tried to climb, but the stone beneath me cracked, a deep fracture splitting the ledge. Panic surged through me like ice water. If I lost my balance, we'd both fall, swallowed by the hollow forever. And then something inside me shifted. Not panic, not desperation, but defiance. I thought of Lucas, of the way his face had become nothing but a mask of emptiness. I thought of Sean's hollow voice, of the countless others who had disappeared here, their lives erased. And I thought of Renee, the only real thing left in this nightmare, the only anchor I had. With a roar that tore my throat raw, I hauled her upward, every muscle threatening to snap. My vision went black at the edges, spots flashing. Her boots scraped the rock, her knees slammed against the ledge, and then, finally, she was over, collapsing against me in sobbing relief. The canyon answered with a wail, a deep, resonant howl that seemed to come from the earth itself. The flames below extinguished in an instant, plunging the hollow into darkness. The knocking stopped. The whispers cut off. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. We scrambled upward, neither of us daring to look back. The ledge sloped into a jagged trail, the air growing cooler, lighter, carrying the faint smell of pine. My legs shook, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. Renee clung to me, her breaths ragged but alive. And then, with one final push, we spilled onto the rim of the canyon. The desert stretched before us, vast and empty under the pale starlight. The hollow gaped behind, silent and still, its mouth yawning like a grave. I half expected it to claw us back down, to pull us screaming into its depths. But it didn't. It just waited, patient as stone. We staggered away until the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The chill gave way to warmth, the shadows retreating as the sun crept over the horizon. Only then did we collapse by the roadside, too weak to move, too stunned to speak. Hours later, a ranger's truck pulled over. I remember the man's face as he climbed out, the disbelief when he saw us. He said we were lucky. Said no one survives a night in Death Hollow if they stray too deep. He asked about the others, about Lucas, and I couldn't answer. Renee just stared at the ground, her hands trembling. They searched, of course, but they never found him. Not Lucas, not Sean, not anyone. Just the same bones, the same scraps of tents and gear weathered by years of sun and rain. The hollow doesn't give back what it takes. Weeks have passed, but the hollow hasn't left me. At night, when the world is quiet, I still hear the knocking, faint, distant, like a heartbeat under the floorboards of the earth. I see Lucas's eyes glowing in the firelight, his voice splitting into something ancient. I feel the ledge crumbling beneath me, Renee's weight in my hands the moment I almost lost her. But I didn't. And maybe that's the only reason I'm here now, speaking these words, instead of drifting somewhere down in the dark with the others. Death Hollow isn't just a place. It's a hunger, a test. It waits for those who wander too far, who think they can camp on its edge and walk away untouched. It strips you down to the truth of who you are, forces you to choose, give in or fight. I fought, not for myself, but for someone I couldn't bear to lose. And in that moment, when the hollow demanded my surrender, I refused. So if you ever find yourself in southern Utah, if you see that scar in the earth they call Death Hollow, don't test it. Don't camp there. Don't follow the whispers. Don't think you'll be the one to come back unchanged. Some places aren't meant to be conquered. Some places are meant to be feared. I'll carry the hollow with me for the rest of my life. But I also carry something else. The proof that even in the deepest dark, even when everything inside you screams to give up, you can hold on. And sometimes that's enough to crawl back into the light.